The cost of living in Australia can vary greatly depending on the city and lifestyle choices. Here's an overview of major expense categories and average costs in Australia. Housing. Rent. Sydney, a one-bedroom apartment in the city centre typically costs between 2,500 Australian dollars to 3,500 Australian dollars per month. Melbourne, rent for a similar apartment ranges from 1,800 Australian dollars to 2,500 Australian dollars per month. Other major cities, Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide, rents are generally between 1,500 Australian dollars to 2,200 Australian dollars. Regional areas, rent is usually much cheaper, with prices ranging from 1,000 Australian dollars to 1,500 Australian dollars for a one-bedroom apartment. Home prices. The median home price in Australia, as of late 2024, is approximately 800,000 Australian dollars, with prices in Sydney and Melbourne often exceeding 1 million Australian dollars. Transportation. Public transport. Monthly pass. The cost of a monthly public transport pass typically ranges from 150 Australian dollars to 250 Australian dollars, depending on the city. Single tickets. A typical single bus or train ride costs between 3 Australian dollars to 6 Australian dollars. Car ownership, car insurance, fuel, maintenance, and registration can cost around 400 Australian dollars to 800 Australian dollars per month, depending on the vehicle. Fuel prices are around 1 Australian dollar and 50 cents to 2 Australian dollars per litre. Food. Groceries. A single person's monthly grocery bill typically ranges between 350 Australian dollars to 600 Australian dollars, depending on eating habits. Family groceries can cost between 700 Australian dollars to 1,200 Australian dollars per month. Dining out. A meal at a casual restaurant typically costs 15 Australian dollars to 30 Australian dollars per person. A 3-course meal for 2 at a mid-range restaurant can cost between 60 Australian dollars to 120 Australian dollars. Utilities. Basic utilities, electricity, heating, cooling, water, garbage. Monthly bills for an average apartment typically range between 150 Australian dollars to 250 Australian dollars. Internet. Monthly internet costs generally range from 50 Australian dollars to 90 Australian dollars, depending on the speed and provider. Healthcare. Medicare. Australia's public healthcare system, Medicare, covers many medical expenses, including hospital care and some medical visits. For those who need private health insurance, premiums range from 100 Australian dollars to 300 Australian dollars per month, depending on the level of coverage. Out-of-pocket costs. For doctor visits, the typical cost is 50 Australian dollars to 150 Australian dollars, depending on the practice and whether you're covered by Medicare. Education. Public education, primary and secondary education in public schools is free for Australian citizens and residents. Some schools may charge small fees for materials and activities. Private education. Private primary and secondary school fees can range from 5,000 Australian dollars to 30,000 Australian dollars per year. University. For domestic students, tuition fees at public universities typically range from 10,000 Australian dollars to 20,000 Australian dollars per year. International students can expect to pay between 20,000 Australian dollars to 45,000 Australian dollars per year. Miscellaneous costs. Entertainment, movie tickets, 18 Australian dollars to 25 Australian dollars. Gym memberships, 50 Australian dollars to 100 Australian dollars per month. Clothing, monthly clothing expenses can range from 50 Australian dollars to 200 Australian dollars, depending on personal preferences. Regional differences. High-cost areas, Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane are the most expensive cities in Australia. Affordable areas, regional areas like Hobart, Tasmania, Adelaide, and some parts of Queensland tend to have lower living costs. Average monthly expenses for a single person, rent, 1BR apartment, 1,800 Australian dollars to 3,500 Australian dollars. Groceries, 350 Australian dollars to 600 Australian dollars. Transportation, 150 Australian dollars to 250 Australian dollars. Utilities, 150 Australian dollars to 250 Australian dollars. Healthcare $100 to $300. Entertainment $100 to $250. If you have any specific location in mind or further details you'd like, feel free to ask. Hit the like button and subscribe to channel for latest news and events. Brought to you by DKFON.com free ads.